I want to welcome you to yet another class on data. In our previous class, we have looked at what biostatistics is. We looked at biostatistics as an aspect that handles data. By collecting those data, you code them, you summarize them, you present them, you analyze and interpret the data, and you make decisions with those data. Now, we need to understand what data is. In some instance, you can call it population statistics. And when you're talking about data, data is simply sets of values of one or more variables that are recorded on one or more observational units. So data is those raw information that are not yet processed, which we get from our field of study or from areas where we are studying. So, and when you talk about data, it is usually resulting from counts or measurements, okay? And you can also derive it from biological sources such as medicine or in biological areas or life sciences. These data are useful because when you get the data, you work on them, you process them. And these data, because it is biostatistics we are handling, these are health related data. So to say, data is a plural form of datum. So raw data are sets of values that have been statistically manipulated. That is to say that information or data generated that is still in its natural form, that has to go through series of processes to bring it into an information as an output. So in descriptive biostatistics, data is described in such a way that the classical features of the spread of a study population are highlighted for quick and easy visual understanding of its characteristics. What it means is that when you have gotten your data, you have sourced them, one very critical area that is of importance in descriptive biostatistics is that you have to present that data that you have collected in a way that it will make meaning to whoever or anybody that will come across your data, okay, in a summarized form. So the following are used to organize data, which we are going to look at shortly. You can use visuals, you can use tables. So we'll talk about it shortly. So there are two types of data. When you are talking about types of data, the first is what we call quantitative data, or we call it non-categorical data. These are measurements that can involve numbers, numerical values. Okay, these values you can count them, and when you are counting it, they are of two types. If you're talking about quantitative data, it can be a continuous data or a discrete data. What do we mean by discrete data? These are data that represent countable values that can take specific or separate values, okay, often in whole numbers. Examples include the number of patients that are admitted in a given tertiary facility, health facility, or you can look at the number of outbreak or people that are contacted from a given outbreak, for example, Ebola, Zika virus, or even COVID-19. You can use and count them. Such numbers are countable. Okay, it has a limit of count. Okay, but when you are talking about continuous data, what it means is that it takes any value within a given range and can be measured, not just counted. Examples include temperature, wind, weight, height of any given subject or entity, etc. So when you're talking about the second type of data, that we call qualitative or categorical. It's just like the reverse of the first, which is quantitative. So these are the two types of data. The first, which we have stated earlier, quantitative, and the second, which is now qualitative. This is a non-numerical. Okay, it is a non-numerical because it is categorical. Data that is grouped into distinct or non-overlapping categories. They represent characteristics or attributes that can be grouped into categories rather than in measurable or measured numericals. Okay, examples of this qualitative data includes one, nominal data. Two, ordinal data. What do we mean by nominal data? This type of data represents categories without any inherent order or ranking. Examples include colors, or you say what are the types of fruits, or what is your gender. Okay, so these are in category. For example, the Likert scale can say it's either strongly agreed, agreed, undecided, or disagreed, or strongly disagreed. They are in categories of which you can now fit into a given category. The second type of qualitative data is ordinal data. This type of data represents categories with a meaningful order or ranking, but the intervals between the variables may not be equal. For example, include what is your educational level, what is your marital status, what is your rank, or what is your, you can rate this variable. Okay, this is the second type of qualitative data. Now we'll be looking at sources of data. There are two sources of data. What it means is how can we get the data from for which we can make decisions on. The first is what we call primary sources of data, which can also be referred to as ad hoc sources of data. In this form of data, it is planned. The process of generating data in the field or from the laboratory or from experiments or from wherever that the source is firsthand. You are the one going to the field. You get it from your respondents. You get it from the field. You are not relying on secondary sources. Such data are called ad hoc or primary sources of data. And for example, such data that falls within this category, we have field surveys, we had experiments which are conducted in either in a control setting, like having a control group against an experimental group. Okay, these are experimental studies and they are primary sources of data. You can also have research, laboratory research works where the students are there to observe their record, their data, or the individual involved is there. Field researches, even in hospital clinics, you have such as primary sources where you are there to observe the unit of variable. We also have primary sources like interviews. We have observation checklists where you are there to get the first-hand information. Such are called primary sources of data. Now, we now look at the secondary sources of data, the second type of sources of data. This type of data can also be called retrained sources. What does it mean? It means that you are relying on existing data or existing information. And this type of data, you can get it from governmental agencies, from individuals, from institutions, from libraries, or from persons that are third party to that research. So this is called routine or secondary sources of data. Example, when you're talking about vital statistics like birth, marriage, immigration registries, bureaucracies, all those data that you can rely on from the archives. We have published demographics such as data from census. We have data from institutions such as hospitals, outpatients and inpatients records from registry. We also have dispensary or health post records. Even from the schools or from hospital settings, you can get data that are existing. Okay, whatever the means of getting this data, either from a retrospective or prospective study, but you are not the one that got it directly, it becomes a secondary sources of data. Now, method of data collection. We can use the following method in collecting our data. The first, use your personal skills by observation, by interview or in-depth interview or focus group discussion, from history taking. You can do physical examination through inspection, percussion or palpation by you doing it yourself. All these are personal use of personal skills. The second type of data collection is when we use instruments. For example, you can use instruments to measure like weighing scale, get records from height scale, and so on and so forth. All these, whatever experiment that you are there to collect yourself using instruments, such are classified as use of instruments in data collection. Then we have the third, which is the use of surveys or questionnaires. In this case, you have a drafted list of questions of to which your respondents can respond to. Sometimes this survey can be an online survey where you don't need to be there, but you have a design form online that people will respond to. Though we still have offline survey. All these are questionnaire, and questionnaire comes in two forms. We have open-ended questionnaire and we have closed-ended questionnaire. When this open-ended questionnaire, that means such questions gives you opportunity to express your opinion. But when it's closed-ended, pre-coded questions, you are only giving a nod or objecting. That is closed-ended. Okay, so when you talk about types of questionnaire, it is either self-administered questionnaire or interviewer-administered questionnaire. So we should know the types of questionnaires and the types of questions that can be in a questionnaire. When you are talking about types of questions that can be in a questionnaire, it can be open-ended and closed-ended. We are talking about types of questionnaires that are self-administered questionnaires, and we have interviewer-administered questionnaire. So whichever form, they are means of collecting data. Then the last aspect of data we are looking at is data presentation. In what way will you present your data in an organized, in a structured way or form that the audience or your viewers or those that will come across your data will find it meaningful? That is what we call data presentation. And in doing that, you must have analyzed your data. You must have summarized your data in such a way that when you are presenting them, you can present them in three forms. The first, you can present your data in textual presentation, the use of reports to explain your data through paragraphs and sentences, best for small or simple data sets. Then the second is tabular presentation. In this case, you organize your data into tables. I say tables are lines that are made up of columns and rows. Lines that are intersecting, horizontal and vertical line intersecting to form rows and columns, allowing us to compare our data sets. We also have the last aspect, which is graphical or diagrammatic presentation, where we are allowed to use pictorial or graphs, charts, diagrams to highlight the relationship between or trends between our data at a glance, such that looking at the graph at a glance or looking at the picture or the diagram, we can be able to understand the information it carries or the weights. So, and when you talk about common types of visual presentation, we have bar charts, we have pie charts, we have line charts, we have time series charts, we have histogram, OGIF. These are the different types of graphs, depending on what information the graph wants to carry. Okay, then we have goal of presenting using either visuals or goals of presenting either using tabular presentation. For whichever way, the first reason why you should present your data in a meaningful way is for simplification. Okay, it makes complex data easy to understand and read. The second, it helps in decision making, facilitate a better and data-driven decisions. The third is it makes it impactful, increases the effectiveness of researches or analysis that you have done. The final aspect is that it helps in memory retention. When you present your data in tables or in graphs, it helps your audience to remember key findings from your study. Thank you for the opportunity to have you in this lecture. God bless.